Okay, great. Let's jump right into the Q&A session with Robert. Robert, do you want to give us a high-level introduction into, I guess, what you are doing currently, and how you got to this point? So why don't you take us away with a nice deep introduction?
All right. I hope my mic is better now.
Mm-hmm. Sounds
Okay,
great.
cool. Perfect. Yeah, right. So, I mean, let's start at the beginning. So I have a background in math and economics, and went down various rabbit holes. First, like startup, then TradFi consulting, then data science for some e-commerce players, and then finally, like 2020, got pulled more and more into crypto, and then yeah, since 2022, basically do full-time support for various projects and mainly 1KX now. So also have come across Livepeer quite early already due to their investments, but then also support various DAOs, as I mentioned. Given my finance affiliation, Risk DAO is one of the mainly maybe more prominent ones. And yeah, so that's typically what I do. Like I'm very much on the data-driven research side and covering basically all aspects. We had it earlier. NFTs, for example, was something I looked into like over the past year. Right now, I'm actually looking into the landscape of DAO tooling and the engagements that DAOs have. And yeah, the biggest piece is though like my home turf is tokenomics. And here we started like 9 months ago to dig deeper into what we would call like Web3, infrastructure. I mean, you can also call it DPIN. We see it a little bit broader. It's all those setups where you have some service in the background, like be it GPU, storage, but it can also be like data access or RPC endpoints and stuff like that needs someone to provide that service. That's kind of like the main requirement for those networks. And yeah, we just started off like looking at something like the Web3 index, who listed like the most mature and prominent ones, and then added the other ones that had at least some data to it. And that gave us like a list of 15, 16 networks to look at. And yeah, we started like, okay, what's the easiest topic to dig into? And this was then the reward emissions actually, right? Because when you think about these networks, the typical question is like, okay, when you reach maturity at one point, you have demand that pays for the supply can improve, and that fosters demand, right? You have this cycle. That's the ideal flywheel that all these networks at one point will achieve, hopefully. And the kickstart is typically the reward emission, and this is also where typically networks are very good in documenting, providing data and clarity. So this is where we started to dig into, and yeah, I'm not sure how deep I should walk into the article we shared. Maybe on the very high level, the major takeaways. It was just on the protocol level. We obviously started looking deeper into like the node operator level, because here and there's data. But on the protocol level, it was very interesting to see that if you take those token emissions, on a monthly basis and put them in relationship to some maximum token supply, they are in very similar ranges. And that was actually interesting that those ranges are similar, and that they're even similar if you do this, for example, like compared to Bitcoin or Ethereum, also over time.
Definitely. So before we jump into the article, because there's lots of information to digest there, and there's very specifics, which we will definitely jump into, I'm sure a lot of us. I want to quickly still stay at a high level. So kind of what is the purpose of your research? What are you trying to achieve with this type of research? And then to follow up is, are you working for a hedge fund, or who are you employed by, or are you employed for doing this kind of work?
Yeah. So I'm officially, I'm self-employed, but I'm working on a like project basis. And lots of projects I get with 1KX, who's like, if you don't know them, they're a VC fund, early stage. Invested in a lot of like early stage protocols. And the original, like why we kicked it off was since a lot of the work we do with protocols we invest in is to help them inform their protocol design, where token design is obviously a big component. And especially when when you talk to infrastructure networks, the challenges are quite typically of like, oh, how do we design this? What can we learn from others? Should we do burn and mint? Should we do work token design? What should we set for minimum staking requirement? How should we progress, decentralization? All these questions, payment token. I mean, there's like, it is like super complex, as you most likely know. And that's why we said, okay, let's maybe start, categorizing and analyzing what protocols did so far, especially in the early days, to then learn, what works, what might not work so well, what can we learn, and how can we, also support new protocols or even like discussions in existing protocols.
Right. So 1KX is a venture company, and you work kind of alongside them, doing reports and help. Are you helping to try guide the ecosystem itself, or are you doing this more for the raising capital of 1KX kind of thing?
Yeah, not so much the raising capital, even though that obviously helps, right? Because you build up some reputation of like, oh, these guys, know some stuff. But it's mainly for existing. I mean, I typically talk to protocols like they invested in, when they already invested in them, and those protocols need some help in their token design. And that also applies then, for the more mature ones, that are already at the stage where there's governance and even governance discussions. And then that's like across the board, right? I mean, I obviously can't tell you all of the 1KX investments, not from a compliance standpoint, just like I just don't know, it's so many. But for example, we also have a similar discussion right now. I'm not sure if you're following other ecosystems, but Pocket is one example where there's currently also economic related governance decisions where we talk as well. But then there's also like for Safe, for all sorts of other protocols where I typically help support the economical discord or the economics related discourse.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I use Pocket Network for my RPC endpoints for all of my nodes.
Very good.
Although I might be switching away, it seems a bit too costly compared to other services. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, they seem to have a reliable product, which is great. But yeah, a lot of us are multi-ecosystem people, participants. So when you speak of some of these networks, some people might have a great amount of experience in them, and some are maybe learning about them for the first time. So it's great to see that type of information. So particularly to your paper, actually, before I dive into the specifics of this report, I want to open it up a bit to the community. Does anyone have any questions for Rob before we jump off, or want any points they want to bring up?
Yeah, I guess just I'll ask a quick question. From your standpoint, Rob, like from getting a general overview of the way the tokenomics of Livepeer works, and from what you've seen and what we discussed on the call we had recently, what is your like initial takeaway from what you see and the research you've done so far with the Livepeer network and the tokenomics associated with it? What's your takeaway from it? Do you think it's good? Do you think there are problems? Do you think there's stuff we need to work on?
So yeah, overall, like obviously it's always relative, right? So putting them in perspective to like our 15, 16 that we selected, Livepeer actually, initially I was like, okay, inflation, But it's really, really good actually. It's like if you look at the dollar-based emissions and the token emissions, it feels quite stable compared to other protocols. I mean, right, we also have the macro environment, so it's clearly like, you know, not all flowers and bees here, but the design itself turns out to be quite solid and you know, compared even to the other protocols, I mean, namely Pocket, it feels like actually on a good path. Obviously, saying that, so that's a positive. I was really like, oh yeah, I mean, that, you know, that feels like there's nothing to worry too much about it. On the other hand, obviously, you can always improve. And this is the one aspect that typically comes with, you know, stake-based models. I mean, this is just like game theoretical fundamentals. Is there is centralization tendencies, and then there can be, you know, misalignments of incentives together with these centralization tendencies, right? And I guess like, but I guess like this is also nothing new for you guys, because what was the recent proposal, the Delta phase proposal, it addresses quite some of these. So that's why it's like, okay, the major takeaway was really, okay, it's good, it's actually quite stable. The token price also reflects that in a way. When I talk, you know, things to improve seem also to be realized and to be addressed, and also at a stage where, you know, it's still like the centralization isn't as bad, and even if it might have been, it seems like the community is still like balanced enough and has like aligned interest on a sufficient level to counteract those tendencies that typically you would get, right? In a purely everybody's rational, everybody plays for themselves environment, right? Like that the model that Livepeer has, you know, playing down in a simulation, engine-based simulation, would just mean at the end there's like one orchestrator running everything, right? And because you also have the governance on top, the governance token, which is also super interesting from a dynamic standpoint, that kind of like, you know, the one guy who gets the most rewards and gets the most work basically, and, you know, that accumulates, then at one point might also get the most voting power. And then there's obviously tons of papers around those dynamics. But meanwhile, there's also lots of interesting research how to build in mechanics that counteract these tendencies. And yeah, what I read in the Delta phrase proposal addresses for sure quite some of these.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a great perspective. I think a lot of us share it, and yeah, I think we're all pretty excited to see what happens with the Delta proposal and how that addresses some of these problems that we've had over the last couple of years.
Definitely. And also on the incentive side, I don't know if you're particularly relating to this, but the supply side is highly incentivized, and the demand side is a struggle because it's not built right into the tokenomic factor, right? So it can be hard to gain that balance too, which is hopefully what the Delta proposal and these video builder DAOs are trying to achieve, right?
Exactly, and that's also something that really surprised. I mean, surprise may be the wrong word, but not all, again, another community that is right now the same discussion basically is Akash. Not sure if you saw their Akash 2.0 discussion, but very much the same, right? Like initially, the rewards are all about, I mean, you know, the validators of the Akash blockchain, and, you know, they have the emission schedule and it's all laid out. But then they realize, okay, you know, we probably need to do more on this demand side as well, because it seems we might be too expensive. And then how can we, you know, do this in a way that we don't just, you know, inflate our token to zero, stuff like that, because it's then obviously the other side of the coin, other side of the metal, I would say.
Yeah. Again, I use an Akash server for hosting one thing, and so it's interesting. But yeah, if I had some sort of incentive to do it rather than just it's cheaper, then maybe there would be a greater pull for more people to build on top of it. So somehow building that into protocol incentives is also very difficult. Any other questions, Papa Bear? I know you had some topics, or are they more specific? Because we'll jump right into the actual report now. Pablo, do you want to bring anything up?
No, I didn't have any specific questions. I just
I'd like to ask
read
a question,
everything.
if that's okay.
Osman, go ahead,
Go ahead.
sir.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking what Robko was thinking about the 50% threshold. Like, shouldn't it be like more like dynamic, like could change from time to time, like in the bear market or the bull market, like the incentive for delegation. Like 50% is like a static number, and it's probably an arbitrary one, like a 2% inflation target, right? From the Fed. It's very static and arbitrary. Like, shouldn't it be updated like as the market goes on? Like, when it's all bad, you could decrease the target, and when everybody is, into Web3 and into crypto, it could be increased.
I'll jump in.
What do you think about this?
I'll jump in real quick, just as a caveat to anyone that can actually propose to change that. So if you're an LPT holder, you can submit an LIP and vote. We can do on-chain voting.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, I can't even say it. On-chain voting, and it'll be updated. So anyone can actually submit that proposal if they believe it should be 60% or 70% or 40 or whichever way you want to go. That can
but
be.
I would. Yeah, I would more like to see it like. I would more like to see it like changed by the code, though. Not not with a voting mechanism, but with the with how it's going with the market, like how much stake there is, or how much work there is. I would like to be like hard coded in the code that if things are going bad, you could change, you could increase or decrease the target, or if things are going good in demand side, with demand side, you could increase or decrease with the code, not with a voting mechanism, but with dynamic in the code. I would suggest.
Well, to some extent, it is dynamic because it is based on the the amount of stake that's the percentage of stake of the total.
Yeah,
token.
no. I believe 50% is like it comes and goes with the voting, right? It's not in the code, is it?
Oh yeah, that's in the code. Because once it goes above 50%, it starts to then decrease. So I don't know the exact percent that it increases or decreases when it's above. Or
No,
below.
what I mean is, yeah, inflation is updated. Inflation is updated. What I mean is the 50% target should be updated.
But based on, I mean, I know you said based on like
based on the demand, or based on how things are going with the project on stuff. Because when the 50% target is not achieved, inflation is updated in the code. Inflation is increased, right? And when the 50% target is achieved, inflation is updated and decreased in the code. What I would like to see is inflation, not inflation, but the 50% target should be updated.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, but the question I would have is, what would you base that on when you say like how the market, or not market demand, but just what was the first example you gave based on
market conditions?
Market conditions.
Yeah,
what does that
and
mean?
demand. I would say, yeah, demand. When demand is low, 50% target is still there, and the 50% target is obviously not achieved in a bear market. Obviously, because everybody's not staking, but trying to escape.
Hey, I just want to step in.
Soon as they get
I'm just going to step in here real quick. I just want to get too sidetracked because this is maybe I want to rephrase this question just a little bit, Osman. Can we make it a bit more broad rather than the specifics around changing this 50%? Rob, can you give us your opinion on inflation in general in these type of protocols and whether you see them as a positive or a negative? Can you just start us with an overview of what your report and what your opinion is of inflationary protocols?
Yeah, sure. Because that's obviously something basically every protocol discusses, and also like the early, as you say, we work with a lot of early protocols, and that's one of their first questions: should we just limit supply right? Because it kind of like feels like the scarcity argument of like, yeah, we know there will never be more like 21, million Bitcoin. So that's the argument. And actually, there is research around that if the inflation is, reasonably low in a sense of like, you don't run like double-digit inflations, you don't get into the Argentinian regime of like 20, 30, 80% inflation. I mean, you can run that, but it shouldn't be like lasting that way. Then what you can see, and I can share that later, even in the chat, that the Tasha Labs did a research of like 1,000 coins or whatsoever. Basically, what the takeaway was, if it doesn't really matter if you say I have maximum, X tokens, there will only be X Livepeer tokens, or there will be like an unlimited, 3% inflation. On the token price, that doesn't really have impact. What you can see in the data is like what typically happens with those limited tokens. They go hotter in the bull and they fall deeper in the bear market. And the hypothesis is that, we didn't research yet, that it's just a certain, user base or like, token holder base you attract. The more degen guys, basically, that jump in because they're like, oh, they can only be that amount of tokens and it's such a cool project, so I gonna jump in. And they are also the first one who go out, right? So long story short, the inflation itself is typically not the problem. It's when inflation runs hot, for too long, or when it's also like, especially in these, infrastructure networks where, the incentives are tied to some cost that you guys accrue, right? You have the costs for your for a GPU farm, for the orchestrator running, your operational costs. And obviously it totally makes sense when somebody, if you have cost of $1,000 a month and somebody pays you 2,000, you're like, okay, fine. And if all of a sudden these 2,000 become like 50,000, I mean, it's rational that you'd start selling those, right? And obviously this can, if there's enough buying pressure in the market, it doesn't really matter. But this is the issue with some of the like hotter inflation tokens. Again, Pocket would be one example that they got so much traction so fast they couldn't reduce the inflation fast enough, and that created quite some sell pressure, and they still are fighting this sell pressure right now, basically, right? Even though the overall tokenomics of Pocket is actually, it's not ill-defined, right? So yeah, and also Osman, to your story, yes, 50% is totally arbitrary. I mean, there's protocols that do like 2/3. Does it need to be? It can be 50%. I think it's really more like a design question, right? Because it's kind of like two purposes that you want to have with the stake rate, right? The one is like it's kind of like a sink for the token because you want to, have a sink for your token, but then also a security aspect because at the end of the day, this is why you want to have stake. And I think the more interesting question where you might want to head for is kind of like, do you want to tie your token model to something like that's, more oriented towards like a dollar value, if you meant this was like bull and bear market, or to kind of like, demand side in the sense of like, obviously these rewards incentivize supply. But Filecoin, for example, they have a very good job in incentivizing supply. The capacity is enormous, but there's just 5% utilization or so, right? So it is a good token model when this is more balanced. But yeah, it's hard to design these things. That's the unsatisfying answer, I would say.
I think Livepeer's in the same boat. We're at like 2 to like 5% utilization of the actual network. That's across a lot of people. If anyone else can update me on that, but that's what I've seen.
Well, what when you say utilization of the network, I just don't know how that would be measured on a decentralized network. A lot of us forget that Livepeer Inc. is the main provider of demand or supply to the network. So I just don't know how that would be measured when it would take, I guess, a protocol change for nodes to be reporting back how much work they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that then takes away from the decentralization, if that's a big deal, or I guess it would be, how do you measure what the how much work is being done on the network?
Yeah. Just to add on to Papa Bear's point, Livepeer actually has no way of determining how much work is being done on the Livepeer network because it is all off chain. The only thing that's on chain is payments, and that is totally determined on how much you charge for your transcoding. So, I could just set my price to like 0 or like 1/10 of 1% of what everyone else is at. I can do 1,000 times more work, but it won't reflect it because no one will see the payments go through, right? So demand is like really hard to actually visualize in Livepeer. The only thing we can see is payments. So, well, how much are we charging for transcoding? Well, that actually varies from each orchestrator. So it's a very difficult problem too.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I mean, Filecoin, right? I mean, it's quite easy, right? Because you see like how much storage they provide, and then you also have all the deals, and you basically can see how much is actually utilized in those deals versus what is just like capacity provided. But yeah, in Livepeer's case, I would also be that would be a really good point of like, if that would be even something that would help the network in the sense of like knowing what type of work is done, because there is also part of like kind of like verification of the work, right? The fast and full verification, if I understood that right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, that's all off chain though, right? So there's no way of there's no one reporting anywhere to any type of system saying how much work is being done, right? Like I have and in Livepeer you can also set your price per pixel based on the broadcaster. So for instance, Ad Astra, he runs a server doing testing. Well, I just have my price per pixel set to 0 for him. So I could be doing hours and hours, days and days of transcoding, but there'll never be a payment sent because it's free. But I'm still using the Livepeer network, right?
Right, but I guess that also means that maybe it could be based on what the how much is paid out.
Sure,
because that is on chain.
Sure, and funny enough, that's actually what delegators only really care about is what are the fees coming in, right? They don't actually care about the amount of work happening. They care about the fees being generated. So that's hopefully that aligns enough with the protocol that, hey, these are the on-chain payments, so therefore this is the type of return you're getting, right?
Yeah. But this is interesting because that's for sure also one of those points where I wonder on the alignment of incentives, right? Because as you said, it's like not the amount of work, or take a step back, right? You would think that the cheapest price for the best performance is what would help the network the most, because then you drive adoption. So the transcoder that can basically deliver that should get long term the most benefit. The question though is like, the guy, if I would be an orchestrator now, I would say, well, I can also get away by just charging. It's not that the optimum is not the cheapest price. It's like I can even charge a higher price, in economic theory, and do less work, but still overall get more revenue. And if this is what delegators will want the most, then this will be the equilibrium. Like just talking theory here, but that's why it's interesting. That sounds like a little bit of a point to calibrate. Not sure how you think about like increasing kind of like the demand side.
Yeah, like as demand side is just really hard to calculate in Livepeer because there's actually just no way of tracking in a decentralized network who is doing what work for how much. Like you can't. You can only see the payments, and you have to just kind of reverse engineer how much work that typically would be. But that's not.
And again, I mean, payments could be the measure. I mean, I'm not. I may have sounded like I was disagreeing with Osmond. Is that your name? I'm not looking at the screen right now, but I didn't mean to come off sounding like I was disagreeing. I was really just trying to understand more of what, or if you had an idea or any proposal for what would be a better way to do it and what metrics it would be based on. To
What
change
I
that
thought was
50%.
like what I thought was like, for example, there's like very low demand right now, right? And maybe I don't know the background, but like maybe 15 or 20 orchestrators are really doing any work right now, but all delegators are getting rewarded. All delegators, right? That's not. I don't think that's fair. Like, if a delegator's orchestrator is not doing any work, the delegator himself should not be rewarded either. So what I would suggest would be, if there's low demand, the delegator's rewards should be cut too. So what I would suggest would be, like, dynamically changing the threshold target, like 50% in the bull market and in the bear market. In my opinion, is not fair. The delegators are rewarded. The delegators are rewarded with the inflationary LPT, and maybe they wouldn't deserve that much. That's what I would.
What I would just add to that, or something to think about, is that the more work an orchestrator does, their delegators, in theory, get more rewards because they're getting ETH as well. So it's a very unique.
The delegators are getting ETH as well.
That's
you
what,
get ETH
that's
if
what
you
transcoding is done in.
Yeah. So like the ETH gets paid out to the gets shared with
Just,
the
Yeah,
now that amount is variable depending on what the orchestrator has it set to, but yes, they most of them share their ETH as well.
all transcoding is done with ETH, not LPT. LPT is just an arbitrary inflationary governance token.
Yeah. But if a delegator's orchestrator is not doing any work, they are still getting rewarded with LPT, right?
Yes, but not ETH. So ideally, a delegator would want to switch to someone who's providing the same amount of LPT and ETH.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my opinion, it's just like if the demand is low, the 50% target should be reduced.
But how do you calculate demand? Because we already discussed that we can't actually like if you're in Indonesia and there's not much, there's only one streamer around you using the network, but you're in London and there's 500 around you. Should we punish the person in Indonesia because they're the only one that can do the work in Indonesia? You can't transcode from London to Indonesia. So do we just punish people that are in low streaming areas? Right? It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, but they can't they delegate to London, to the orchestrator in London?
Sure, but why should we punish an orchestrator for being in an area where maybe they're the only orchestrator?
It's a bear market. It's low demand. So in Indonesia, if you don't have the bandwidth or if you don't have demand around you, that's the way it should be, right? I mean, but if you don't have any demand.
Yeah, but if we want, but the goal of the network is to supply highly robust, reliable transcoding service anywhere you are in the world. Economics should not affect the bear market comes, and so now your live stream has missing frames. Like, that doesn't make any sense. We should be incentivizing people to be spinning up nodes in the most dispersed way possible to get the best performance.
Yeah, there are trade-offs.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, it's a really interesting conversation. Osman, I'd really highly recommend if you'd like, is to head over to the Livepeer Forum and bring this up in a forum post. I don't think this has been a forum post yet. I would bring up kind of well thought out. Like,
I kind of talked about this with Doug on Twitter. But that was just a Twitter chat, and that was it.
Maybe a more thought out forum post explaining, the problem, maybe a potential solution, or if not a solution, at least just addressing the problem clearly. I think that would be a really good way to start that conversation.
Yep. Okay.
I would agree, because what it sounds to me like the points I heard are really interesting in the sense of like, what does a network want, right? And at which stage? Because obviously, yes, you want to help the guys who run nodes in Indonesia where there's low demand, but that's kind of like, is then actually something like, yeah, that means a network probably, the guys in London who make more money probably need to subsidize for sometimes the guys in Indonesia. And then that's typically something that you see across protocols of like, these are sometimes implicit, decisions where then at one point, especially in bear markets, the community realizes, oh, but why do we still support all this tail end? Because right, when people need to tighten the belt, they typically, this is when they start saying, do we really want that or not? So that's why it always helps to foster this discussion of like, what do we really want and what are our priorities? Because that can then inform a good update on the tokenomics design. Because there's lots of designs out there to target those goals, but especially on protocols that are running up in the wild so large and so long as Livepeer do. Obviously, you can't just redo the whole thing overnight.
So, Rob, I have another question. So Livepeer has this dual kind of structure for tokenomics. It has the Livepeer governance token, which is inflationary and used for voting and all these kinds of things. But it's actually not used for payments at all in the network. Livepeer is not used as a payment method. In fact, Livepeer only uses ETH as payment. So if you want to use the Livepeer network, you have to pay in Ethereum. And transcoders and orchestrators get paid ETH for every pixel, essentially, they transcode. So how many networks other than Livepeer have this system where they have a governance token separated from the payment token? And I think Livepeer used ETH because of its nativeness to the Ethereum network, and it's much harder asset than, say, a number 200 on CoinMarketCap. How many other protocols use this system, and is there benefits or negatives to it?
Of the larger ones, it's actually just Livepeer. Like of the top 15. There's probably some DPIN networks that use similar. And then there's this mixed forms of like Akash again, where they now discuss adding stables on top of Akash, but Akash is still the one where you get the biggest discounts and so on and so forth. Because it's very tempting. It's a good discussion to say like, do we want our payment token to be also our native token? Because it's often good because when you have that, then you have another sync basically, because people need to use your token to engage with you. But again, it has the advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage or your advantage here is really, ETH is rather a stable kind of like crypto native payment or unit of account basically. So no matter how good or bad Livepeer does, right, you have kind of like a decoupled payment. Other protocols think about like stable coins even, right? Because then you can even tie it more closely to actual costs that you incur. But yeah, there's actually so distinct that you guys do it of the larger ones. Storage, I think they have payment. They have anyways, decentralized with and you pay with fiat even and stuff like that. So I need to double check, but yeah, I'm almost certain that of the larger ones and the mature ones, it's just Livepeer that followed that path. And yeah, it when I looked into it, I'm like, actually, this is it. Initially it might be less beneficial, but on the long run it should be more beneficial because you kind of like always have some decoupled value for the work that people are doing. Right? Because assuming that ETH stablecoins, right, like they remain in value.
Yeah, that was one thing that really attracted me to the network, was that decoupling. Right, it reminded me of a traditional equity where you don't buy your Apple phone with Apple stock, right? You don't need to buy, to buy your iPhone. You don't need to go to the brokerage and buy Apple shares to then trade your Apple shares for your iPhone.
Exactly.
You use
that.
a currency, a liquid currency, is widely accepted and recognized, and then once the company receives that currency, they can do whatever they want. They can buy back shares, or reinvest, do all types of things. And so Livepeer has this interesting set where all the work on the network is done in ETH, and that's very recognizable amongst many protocols, and it's also easier to price because it's less volatile. Imagine your transcoding bill went up 3x because the Livepeer token went up 3x, right? Then it becomes very hard to manage just about anything. Whereas maybe Ethereum is a little more stable, and then obviously stable coins could be arguably the most stable, depending on which ones and which underlying collateral risk you're willing to take on top of those. So they come with their own set of risks. But yeah, it's interesting that Livepeer is one of the only ones with that type of protocol built in for payments.
The separation is neat. I would actually be curious, like, how is it for you when you price? Like, how much do you just convert into stable coins versus like you really make calculations in ETH?
I personally don't sell it. I just keep it in ETH. Like, those are earnings. Those go. I spend the ETH on operating expenses. And almost every everyone will accept ETH. If they accept crypto, they'll accept ETH. So it's pretty easy to pay in ETH.
Yeah.
So it becomes a very easy ecosystem to run, because the amount of work you do is relative to the size of your costs. Likely, you get paid in ETH. Everyone usually accepts ETH, and then Livepeer is just this inflationary governance token that incentivizes participation and disincentivizes people hodling and not staking, because those people aren't actually contributing to the security of the network. So that's the theory behind it. Another question I have for you is, is your current research on infrastructure services, like infrastructure tokens only? Do you look at L1s or strictly governance tokens? What is your current research outlook?
So right now we started with this like 15, 16 networks, right? Right, I mean, RE, like on the storage ones, then, Akash, Render, Livepeer compute ones. We have some privacy one like NIM, just because they have very interesting mechanics. And it's basically we broaden the focus a little bit in the sense of like, we can add as there are more. I mean, the DPIN sector is quite, it's hot is the wrong word, but it's growing with new ideas and still ticking up. And yeah, so the focus is rather broad in the sense of like, just don't do anything about, security, layer 1, layer 2, and all that stuff. There are projects where, again, via 1KX, we discuss some of these aspects with some protocols that tackle these rollups, layer 1, chains. But this research is really about the whole notion about there is node operators that provide a service, and then there's a network where on top of that you just need certain other functions like the validators that check that the work is correctly done, and then also typically some gateways that help users to connect these services. And yeah, the initial, as I said, the initial first phase was just like the easy step of like, okay, what can we read in the, what we get basically from data on chain or various dashboards and so on and so forth. This is like reward emissions and that component. The demand side is the next piece where, again, data is typically, available. In Livepeer's case, you would look at payment data. What is next is actually the hardest part we would like to look into, and this is actually more the cost side, right? Because this is typically something no network has, no decentralized network has much transparency about. And what I mean is it not so much like how much every node spends each month, but more like on the setup side, right? Like what are the setups that these networks run, and maybe as a as a context here, it's you kind of like want to understand the cost base of the network, because the hypothesis or the question that we have is like, okay, you can kind of like see the incentivization plus the demand, kind of like the income side of the network, and then see like, okay, what's the cost side, like just like a business. And then if one is higher than the other, I mean, that's obviously not good. But then you can also say, well, isn't that kind of like well, I mean, not the revenue versus the cost side. Let me wind back a little bit. But if you think about like a fully centralized setup, right? I mean, I wouldn't even know what a company is like that, a good company that does Livepeer setup in a fully centralized way. But think about this one, and these guys know their cost very well, right? And they can adjust both the income side with the pricing and the cost side with some efficiency gain or their offerings or their SLAs. I mean, they would just shut down Indonesia, for example, right? And do that. And decentralized networks like Livepeer, right? You need to find those efficiencies for yourself, and have I mean, you basically set the constraints by the governance. And but what would we love to see is kind of like as some research, if you contrast if you have an understanding on the level of decentralization for the network and see the cost base, there's two outcomes that I would expect. The one is like, okay, your cost base might be higher than the fully centralized setup. I mean, this is by economies of scales what you would expect. And then this gap, that's kind of like the decentralization premium that you pay by not having these economies of scale. However, if you think about Uber and those cases, right, this is the ideal case, and this is typically also for a lot of DPINs the pitch that if it's resources that are idle or anyway not used otherwise or available otherwise, isn't there some actually lower cost case? But yeah, long story short, this is something where we would like to head next, but obviously this is the stuff where we would need input from the communities. And yeah, if I can add that one here in that group, one idea that we had, actually, not sure if this was ever done or even brought up in forum posts. I haven't seen anything. We would actually do some sort of like small survey across orchestrators. I mean, obviously we have something in mind. Again, it was very much about like the setups, how many GPUs, CPUs, like storage, like bandwidth, like very like high level setup questions. Yeah, to kind of like get an understanding of that. But then actually more the question to you guys, if this is something that could even be useful for community discussions to have more insight on that.
Definitely. I think that would be gathering orchestrators to do these type of things can be easy and difficult. Some of us are very excited to jump in and provide, and then a lot of orchestrators are MIA. They just are building on their own. They're actually not really a part of the community. So this type of gathering of information would be super helpful. It actually gives me the idea of, in Titanode Pool, I have a list of, all the hours. I know all the hours that I've transcoded. I know, all the statistics around the supply that it has. It almost create a dashboard where it displays this type of financial output of what these costs would be, and help provide some context around the network. Is that kind of what you're looking for, like the cost side of running orchestrator infrastructure, or is this more on like the video developer side? People use the demand side.
No, it's for sure the supply side, because right at the end of the day, this is where you still have the largest incentivization. Right, to your point, right? The demand side is not so strong, and also like hard to measure, because right that is something where we also feel like that can also help inform kind of like the discussions around like, not so much about like, okay, do Orchestrator get too much or too little, but more like, do we have certain setups that are just like inefficient? And I mean, it feels to me like something like Video Miner is something that already builds upon this hypothesis that, there are ways we can, actually save costs as a network. I mean, even the low-hanging fruit of like, just go to Arbitrum, whether it's for all the payment settling, right? These types of, this is what I would have in mind. And yeah, it could be something, I mean, for me, it's really more the question of like, to your point, what is the best way to, start such survey? Is it just a governance post to say like, look, we would like to conduct a survey. It's obviously all, free and as confidential as you guys need it to be. But yeah, I would just like ideally also, get input from the community of like, what are questions related to such survey that would help you guys, going forward, be it governance discussions or even design decisions.
Very good. We've been here for about an hour. Rob, how much time do you have? I mean, I have like 4 more questions. We can keep going for as long as possible, but I want to respect your time. How much time do you have left with us that you could spare?
Oh, I can go longer. The kids are asleep, so I'm off duty tonight, so I can for sure go like at least half an hour more. So happy to answer all questions there are.
Wonderful. Okay, so I've got 4 more questions, but I want to open it up also to the community. Do we have any more general topics that we want to cover, or any questions that we cover that people have been thinking of? Okay, so another question I had for you, Rob, was this idea of projects that you have been evaluating. What classifies as something that you would investigate, and what would you disregard? How many projects have you disregarded amongst your list of 15, 16 projects?
I mean, there were a couple that just didn't have enough data to, make some meaningful, claim of like, oh, this project. I mean, even this list of 15, 16 projects, right? You have at least one comes to mind, Poland, for example. During the time of investigation, they basically shut down the network. Like, I mean, they didn't shut down the network, but the whole economics, was like turned out of head, like on top of its head. So that's why initially we started with like the big ones where you knew, okay, these have been around for at least a year, and so they likely will be around for another year. And also, there's a token live, there's some data available that you can look into, and there's, a decent path towards centralization. So that was kind of like the original approach. It was not so much about, this is a pure scam. I mean, I think it was kind of like an implicit filter when, we wouldn't even look at any project where we knew like, okay, this, it's just like a pump and dump scheme. So yeah, the number I can't even tell. It was probably like 10 where we're like, oh yeah, it sounds interesting, but then, you look closer into the data and then you're like, oh, very interesting mechanic, but the token, it's not live yet, so you can't know how it will look up in the running. Right? I mean, Fluence, for example, is one example where I would love to see their token model up in the live wild, but I haven't followed if they launched that or not yet. So
definitely. So because one of the reasons I bring this up, and not to harp on this for the people that have been in here for these water coolers, but there's really only one other protocol that does transcoding specifically. There's other protocols that utilize GPUs for different things, but there is a network called Theta that does transcoding. It's in their pipeline. Have you looked into their protocol? And I see that it's not on your list of things that have made it.
No. I actually don't know them. Like, are they around for longer? Or
Yeah, they've been around a while. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so it's Fida with like an F or
Theta at TH.
Theta.
Theta,
I think
yeah.
that one rings a bell.
It's like number 50 on CoinMarketCap.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can probably take a look. That makes sense. Yeah, we haven't had them, and it didn't came up when we discussed, with the various analysts, and also, as I said in the beginning, right, we kind of like boiled down from like the big ones and then sprinkled down a little bit and see like, okay, what else is interesting to add. So yeah, that sounds like a protocol to also take a look.
Yeah, I would highly recommend doing your, like, obviously I'm biased. I own Livepeer tokens. They do something similar, but also quite different. They have a totally different approach to how they're handling video infrastructure. It's very top down, or it's founded by the guys from YouTube and Twitch and these kind of things. They have partnerships with large companies, and so they're mostly focusing on the content delivery network. That's kind of their main product is the delivery network rather than the actual transcoding. Transcoding is more of like an add-on, if you will. But anyway, I would highly recommend just peeking an eye into there, and I'd love to hear your opinion about what you find and what your conclusion is, and just for general information, of course. But so that project never even came up. Are there other projects that you disregard? Like obviously you're not touching the Doge coins, or unless you are, are meme coins even a part of your radar, or are you really just focusing on ones with use cases that you see are important?
Yes. It's for sure. I mean, use cases, but again, right, like also the whole notion about there's someone needs to spin up a node to support the network. And obviously this is like a very broad definition, right? Because, if you run an Ethereum validator, technically, you also, I mean, not technically, but you also need to spin up a node. But that's why it's kind of like everything like that, but your use case is not security, right? Like not like, chain validation or stuff like that. And if I need to make it then even more restrictive, then I would say, okay, it actually is DPIN, like these decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Not sure if this is already like a standard term to use, but this is kind of like the focus area of protocols we look at, where typically, I mean, these are like less speculative from like the meme potential.
Right. What did you call it? DPIN? Is that what you said?
Yeah. This is I think Messari, the Messari analyst Semi, he coined that term. I still would say, well, it's still a little bit short, because if you think about Pocket Network, they wouldn't count Pocket Network as a DPIN, like DEPIN. But then you're like, the guys, you need to run a node, and this node actually has two components, and it's like you also need, it's not security what they provide. They give RPC, run RPC relays for you. So it's my definition for the research is quite broad, but if I need to explain it in one sentence, I would say, okay, it's DPIN plus probably, but for sure, anything NFT, Dogecoin, like all this speculational other stuff is for sure not what we look at. We're looking at those setups where someone needs to run a node to join the network.
Interesting. Okay, I just Googled it here. I didn't realize. Yeah, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. There's a little blog on it. But you said Missouri was the first to.
Yeah, Messari. They are quite into that field as well.
Great. Well, I'll have to look it up. I'll just link the one. Oh, there you go. Okay, link the actual.
Yeah. They also have a quarterly Livepeer report, right? For
yes,
Live.
Of course. Yeah, they're influential in our ecosystem as well. They come along and do reports on us, and we talk to them. So no, they're a great resource as well. So and again, I think their alignment is I think similar to yours, where they're trying to provide some really good technical data-driven feedback around the ecosystem to help guide the community and the developers around good decision making. And you can do that by just anonymous people or companies coming in and just providing that type of feedback and resource, right?
Yeah, that's very much the same spirit here, right? To first understand, okay, see. I mean, that's the thing that I can do, right? Like that's my background. I can't. I'm not very good at communicating and writing long discussion thread, but I can provide the data and say like, look, if you look at that, this will happen. So you better choose option B or C, things like that.
Very good. It's highly valued in our community, so we do appreciate your feedback. I want to also kick into a different gear, which is what questions do you have for us? Are there any burning questions or things that you've come across that you need clarity on, or what questions do you have for the Livepeer community?
So yeah, I mean there's for sure one piece that typically is where I start with with the whole cost context, and this is around like number nodes versus number node operators, right? I mean, obviously there's 100 orchestrators, but I guess that doesn't mean there's 100 different people running orchestrators.
So there are 100 orchestrators, so that's 100 accounts that are registered to receive work, that are eligible to receive work on the network. And then with each orchestrator, they can have unlimited amount of transcoders, right? So a transcoder is the one that's actually doing the work. So there's independent orchestrators that only are also one transcoder, and so they just run them on the same spot, and so you are just one node. And then you can have pools like Video Miner or Titan Node Pool or Live Pool, where we have ingest nodes, and then many transcoders are connected to each of those ingest nodes. So then you can have a wider array of coverage or capacity. So an orchestrator in itself could be also just one company, right? Like if you were Google would sign up as an orchestrator, and that would be one orchestrator, but they'd have many nodes doing all the compute, right? Which is the transcoders. So does that answer your question?
Yeah,
I think to add a more finer point to that is, if you look at orchestrator by orchestrator, the key factor with Livepeer is regions, right? Geographical regions. And this is probably unique or a little different compared to some of the other ones. But as Titan pointed out, if you're in Singapore, you may look at that region as, I'm a node operator myself. I run the Zode orchestrator, and I always look at demand versus cost balance, right? Like you pointed out, if there's a Singapore region, do I have the ability to run an orchestrator node in that region? And also with the work coming in, transcoding fees and the reward calls that you're going to collect overall, is that profitable? Does that make sense for me to run? And I think you'll find a lot of orchestrators are always making those decisions, but they're doing it region by region. Some people will only run out of their home or only have one location, but you'll definitely find quite a few orchestrators that are looking at each region and saying, okay, where's the demand coming? Should I be there? Can I be competitive? What's my cost structure look like as it relates to operating in that region? And will I be able to sustain it? I think a lot of orgs are looking at that data often.
And when you say they run do they run, is it one orchestrator that runs transcoders in those regions, or is it really kind of like an orchestrator instance that you would run?
Yeah, it's typically one software instance that runs in a region based on the current demand. But for a given region, you could definitely see spikes in which you can expand past a single node. So, unless that's the common, breakdown. Do you want to have one really big server with a lot of capacity, or do you have, a bunch of smaller ones that, you can kind of expand them up and contract them based on, the demand spikes that you may see? Because, running a big server with a lot of, hardware, it's going to be expensive on a month to month. But if you have the ability to expand and contract your infrastructure based on the region and the demand, then that's you have something special. And I think, some of the broadcasters like the Xenon Orchestrator, they're seeing this now themselves play out as they are in, primarily like New York. They have a couple regions, but, they can really tap out a single orchestrator with a spike, right? And then that means, they got to expand to more than one orchestrator, or they got to go to the public pool. So, or they got to spin up their own transcoders.
But I would say a point, maybe that isn't clear. It wasn't clear for me at the beginning. You can run an orchestrator account, one Ethereum address, on different nodes. So when we talk about 100 orchestrators, there could be around 500 servers, each running,
That's
so
correct.
5 servers, each running
Absolutely.
one key. And
Absolutely.
I would say from the perspective of a small orchestrator, I'm not incentivized to run 2 nodes, because I would have to split my stake, my delegation, to say.
Well, no,
So,
the staking
Mhm.
part is for the account. So like literally, you're staking for an account, and if you have 5 nodes running, they all are going to benefit from the same staking. Like you only get rewards for the account. You don't get rewards for each node you're running.
Right. Yeah. So I would say there are 100 different companies or persons running orchestrators, I think.
Yeah, and each
Okay, yeah, that
each
helps.
orchestrator can run unlimited instances of its orchestrator. That makes anything more clear.
Yeah, that's indeed a little bit puzzling, but I guess I get it now because it's like,
Yeah,
okay, you
no,
have this
it's pretty
100
unique.
accounts.
It's very unique from most other protocols would require a separate account, ETH account or whatever cryptocurrency that they're working in account to run a separate node. So, I mean, I personally run 5 nodes for mine, and most of the top orchestrators run several in several different regions.
And a Titan node pool runs 8 orchestrator nodes, and then with that, there's up to 5. No, currently only about 23 transcoders connected to those, but a total of 256 transcoders registered to the pool. So, yeah, it's kind of dispersed.
And again, for my stuff, it's demand based. So when I see regions are kicking up really high, like if you look back in time in November, and if you go to look at some of the reports on the payouts, we saw that in November, December, there was a lot of work going on, a lot of people getting paid out, a lot of tickets. And at that time, it doesn't hurt to have your transcoders and your orchestrators running in all those regions. But if you look at today, where the demand is a lot lower than it was in November, you might want to start scaling back a little, reducing the footprint you have, or, moving into a pool model versus, a single orchestrator model. Maybe you don't want to run any GPUs at all. So there's definitely trade-offs that orcs are making, and demand and payout are drivers.
I would say, though, when you say demand is going down, it's not overall Livepeer demand. There's just more high-performing network orchestrators on the network. So you're losing work to more orchestrators. I'm pretty sure the amount of usage on the network has been pretty flat for about a year.
ETH payment that has been gone down.
Yes, but since VOD, many
Minutes have
orchestrators
gone
took
down.
a 30% cut. So it's kind of.
But minutes have gone down too, right, Titan?
But
The minutes.
minutes is only an
Yes.
assumption based on fees paid, and right around mid last year or last year we had VOD rollout, so a lot of orchestrators took a 30% cut. So technically there's a 30% drop in usage, but there's not actually. It's just fees have gone down 30% because we made it 30% cheaper.
Yeah, but the Livepeer Explorer says the minutes have gone down to right. I'm watching the graphic right now, and
Yeah,
it
but
says like the minutes,
that's just a
not the fees,
guesstimate.
but
That's a guesstimate
Mhm.
based on the fees paid. You can't actually determine how many usage.
Mm,
The minutes is
okay.
100% incorrect. There's no way to tell. The minutes is just
Oh,
wrong. There's no way to actually tell the amount of work on the network. It's impossible. So that what you
Okay.
do is you take the average price per pixel that the network charges, you
Okay.
divide it by the amount that's been paid out, and you come up with an estimated usage. But it's just wrong. It's just there's no way of actually determining how much work is on the network. So we decrease our price across the network by 30%, and it looks like there's 30% less usage, but there's not. It's just
That's good to hear.
yeah. So it's a bit
Another thing that makes it tough to tell is if you look at the Explorer page, it's all denominated in USD, where we're paid in ETH for the for the fees. So that's very dependent on what the ETH price is.
I'm pretty
ETH to
sure
USD.
network usage is actually going up in terms of minutes used, but because of the decrease of price of ETH and because of the 30% cut, we're actually down. Like the fees on the network is down like 50 to 60%, but the amount of work is actually static. Is about the same. So yeah, it's even misconceiving that way. It's really tough.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, when I was speaking about the trade-offs I'm making, it literally is how much did I make last month, right? How much did I earn in rewards? How much did I earn in ETH? And how much is my current payout for servers and infrastructure, right? And I'm looking at the total cost of the infrastructure versus the total payments coming in. And if I see like there've been a couple slow months, and again it may just be my orchestrator, to Titan's point, maybe some stake moved and the work shifted a little bit, and I'm just on the lower end of getting the work, and I might go through a period of a drought in which I don't get the payouts I was getting before, what have you, whatever the circumstances are. But I still will look at that and say, where do I need to shut down a region because I no longer have the the capacity, either financial or whatever, to sustain it in that area. So, and you look at Singapore is always the one. I know we pick on Singapore, but it just happens to be the one where if you're gonna cut, there's the areas where you see the least amount of work, you're gonna start trimming back there.
Definitely. Okay, Rob, that was a big long explanation of that. Hopefully that answered your question.
No, yeah, that was super helpful to also understand like these regional specificities. Yeah, and I mean it brings back the question of like, I mean, I'm not sure if this like whole notion about transparency about like how much work the actual network is actually doing, if this is something actually would be helpful for the network, I would know. But my larger question is actually, okay, again, I mentioned we probably will draft soon like a governance post, a forum post, for survey where I would love to get input, and ideally then also somebody submitting some of these surveys. But what would be question that you feel like we could also add there that would help, or could provide good insights when you kind of like get a decent amount of orchestrator or node operator input?
I'm sorry, I don't quite follow that question. Can you say it again?
Yeah. What would be questions like again? Like my plan would be to over the next days or next week post a forum post addressing node operators in the sense of like, look, we would like to continue this research, and costs would be the next bucket we would like to address, or more like the setup that node operators run. And this survey, we can obviously add more questions to it besides like what's relevant for research. And there is actually the question like what would be helpful or what could be helpful for you, for the community to add to such survey.
Yeah, so you let me get this straight. You're creating a survey for the community about node operating costs. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but the focus more on the setup, right? Like to Mike's point, like or to your point, like how many instances you run. Do you run it more dynamically, statically? Do you have one big server or smaller nodes? I mean, we still need to, that's the thing where like I probably just will share a draft and then try to get input of like how to properly, do those so the output correctly reflects what's useful. But then there's additional question of like, okay, what else could be a useful, research questions to dig in?
I mean,
I think there's. Sorry, go ahead, Titan.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say there's quite a variety of techniques and strategies that folks use to install and configure their nodes. So like again, one of the probably easiest questions you could ask would be, are you self-hosted at home or within one data center, or do you have virtual private servers? And like those kinds of things are going to be important to understand, right? Because I think a lot of the high performing ones, like I said, are looking for that elasticity. So like one of the other things that at least I spent time on with this community has been, enabling Docker and some of the DevOps automation surrounding it. So if you wanted to, running a Livepeer node, you also have to run, you have to have Arbitrum access. And if you want to run an Arbitrum node, you have to have a Geth node. Having these layers, a lot of folks run them themselves at home, or they may run it out in the cloud, or they may just pay infra, or you know what I mean? So I think those are some of the the types of questions that I would be interested to know, like what other stacks look like. What are their, are they load balanced geo region? Are they in a single region? VPS at home hosting, how many GPUs per region? Like, I think those are definitely a lot of questions that would be useful to know.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about Livepeer is the scope is so large because it's not like like Pocket Network, you're providing an RPC endpoint. Okay, great. Well, you can provide, a couple geolocated ones, and it's all the infrastructure is going to be relatively the same. You're going to, what does that take to run the Arbitrum node? Okay, well, we kind of have an idea of how much that would be. How many RPCs can it handle? All these types of things. Livepeer is like very like it's a media server for video, right? So like it gets real not messy, but really customizable to like how you want to do it. I mean, I've built a Livepeer mining box for under $300 using Chinese parts, and it competes with top tier server grade that you rent at Amazon for $700 a month, right? For transcoding specifically. So, how are you distributing these? Where are they located? What's your internet like? Like it's like really, there's like a lot of factors. So yeah,
Well, we know that when you're renting servers, or if you're building servers for that matter, the GPUs are going to be a significant cost, right? And I think understanding the location of those GPUs is also another factor for being an orchestrator. Like if your orchestrator is super close to the Livepeer broadcaster and you have a GPU that is also super close, that does, it makes your performance, your latency really good. So you're going to, you have a higher chance of getting work. But if your latency is really, if you're trying to transcode from Singapore through LA, you're going to have problems, right? Like that's just not going to be feasible. So I think knowing, and again, this is stuff that maybe people don't want to share. They're probably going to be sensitive to that, is where are their GPUs and how many are they close to Livepeer's ingest nodes, or are they just strategically located in key regions so that they can just get a broad stroke of the work versus trying to optimize for one region.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, yeah, that's for sure the stuff that or the aspects where, again, more coming from like, okay, the overall network kind of like cost, you know, how much, I think we also did, yeah, how much is that, like how, but I guess like given this regional setup, this is actually like just a additional layer I actually haven't considered that much in depth, because to your point, Hayden, right, like the pocket question, it's, you know, rather simple compared to that, because yes, they also have regional aspects, but you know, the setup is quite similar. And here you have this like, yeah, almost like multi-dimensional facets of optimizing your setup.
Yeah.
Don't forget that the rewards, remember we talk about incentive for work, and getting those reward tokens from Livepeer, those tokens go to one ETH account. So you could have a monster fleet of servers and infrastructure running on the network, but if your stake is low, you're just going to get very little incentive, right? Like you could have super amount of stake and have only one node running, not really transcoding, and you're going to get a lot of incentive rewards. So I think that's an area where, you know, there's a disconnect in that regard in terms of having the infrastructure capacity and all that planning stuff, but it's really loosely tied to rewards and incentives. I think the ETH payouts are going to be the driver for those who run multiple regions.
Yeah. Yeah, theoretically, once the demand goes higher, the ETH payouts are supposed to override the inflationary incentive. And so the delegators and the node operators will all be coagulating around, you know, high performing, high earning, high capacity, you know, transcoding, right? And so this idea of bootstrapping the system with LPT inflation becomes less and less important as demand rises, because the fees will then start to adjust where delegators go, right?
Actually, that was what I was just saying. You know, when the demand is low, we should also decrease the incentive for the extra LPTs that's coming with inflation, because let's say, okay, let's play a hypothetical scenario here. Like when you drop the inflation target, drop the threshold target to like 10% in a bear market when there is low demand, the total delegated LPTs will drop, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it will drop for all the orchestrators. Mm-hmm. So it's not gonna even change the ranking for orchestrators, right? And the same amount of work will be done. The inflation will drop, the price will pick up, and the vibe goes up, right? So there is no harm to the network here, because there's low demand anyway.
Yeah, but
right?
You're kicking a mother down.
Am I wrong?
Isn't that, you know, when the network is low, we want to incentivize. We want to be able to pay for people's infrastructure. We don't want to kill the network while it's down.
No. The 100 orchestrators will still be paid the same ETH, right? The inflation rewards to the delegators will drop.
Yeah, but right now the bulk of what orchestrators are earning is the inflationary LPT.
Yes.
Yeah, they are also getting the inflationary LPT. Yeah.
Most orchestrators wouldn't be able to afford their infrastructure based on the current network demand in ETH.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
it's currently offsetting your cost as those reward tokens. So cutting those off would hurt the orchestrator, would hurt the network.
We need to subsidize people's equipment early on. If we cook them while they're down, then we're just not going to have. At the end of the day, like, if you're watching a stream and you have missing frames, that pisses people off, and no app is going to use a.
Yeah, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, you're just not going to compete if you have a missing frame, or distortion, or tearing, or any type of video imperfection. People demand like super high quality video nowadays. Like if we're off by a little bit, it won't gain adoption. So like we need to have it's the chicken and the egg problem. I think you wrote about this, Rob. It's like, how do you have to have demand before you can start getting good infrastructure, or do you need to have good infrastructure before you can handle the demand? Well, you probably need good infrastructure first, but then that needs to be subsidized, because in the beginning there's not much work. But and so the less work that's coming in, the more subsidized we need to be to provide that good service, right?
Yeah.
That would be my only rebuttal to that comment. But
And,
Rob,
and don't forget though, too, the point here is that the orchestrators in this the keystone of this whole thing. It's like the broadcaster is going to pay, and then the delegators are going to be the ones getting the stake that comes from the delegators go to the orchestrators, which drives the amount of work that orchestrator gets. So, like, as an orchestrator, you have to adjust your settings and your costs for your infrastructure, and also to be attractive to delegators so that you can get stake. Because if you don't have stake and you have a massive infrastructure, which was the mistake I made when I joined, I thought I could jump in here with enterprise stuff, AWS instances, like, elasticity, crazy stuff, Kubernetes, like all this stuff. And then when it was all said and done, like, no demand, the servers were sitting idle. They like shut down on their own, and like no servers running, you know what I mean? Because it was just nothing, but it still costs money. So, but being able to find that sweet spot where you can get your fees and reward cuts set to a certain rate in which you can continue to accumulate stake from delegators, at the same time being able to keep your costs low and expand it only when you need it, is like that fine line that the orchestrators have to walk. And I think that's the orchestrator is the only role in the Livepeer network that has to toe those lines.
The orchestrators are doing the real work, and orchestrators are like the owner of the network. So it's like 100 people owning and running the network. And yeah.
Well, delegators are the owners of the network, right? Orchestrators are just self-delegated.
Yeah, in theory, yes, but it's just you are doing the real work. So yeah. Of course, you have to be compensated for what you've been doing and for what you're doing, and as a delegator, I can't really suggest to decrease the rewards and stuff because you are taking the costs, right?
Yeah,
they do. They can. You know what I mean? Again, if you have a dialogue with delegators, I mean, again, this is permissionless, so that in theory, no one knows anybody, but. If you go check out my org page, you can see my contact info. You can reach out, and delegators do that to orchestrators on occasion. And again, you may be able to, broker an agreement with a delegator. Like that's all fair game, right? That happens.
Yeah, yeah. It's also a fact that since there's low demand, if there's not 100 orchestrators and there's like 40 orchestrators, the work will still be done. Like there's not going to be a missing frame. So if it's 10 orchestrators, it will still be done.
Well, I don't know. If there's only 10 orchestrators on the network, I bet you majority of areas.
Hypothetically, yeah. I mean, it's like if it's not 100 and if it's 50, I don't think there's going to be a problem in a bear market.
Well, okay, but
in a low demand environment, I should say.
I just want to say though that like. We're not actually at all-time lows for video transcoding, right? Like we're actually more at all-time highs. Like when you look back and you see the peak of when the most work was done, that was during the peak of the bull run, which is when ETH was worth $4,000. So every ticket that came through was worth more. And so like it is the problem with denominating the work in USD and the minutes based on that USD is that the price of ETH fluctuates, and then the price of our actual transcoding fluctuates. So, like, I'm pretty sure we're at we're at a lot higher transcoding now than we are throughout the year. Like, we're not at all-time lows for transcoding. We're actually like near
that's
all-time
actually
highs.
good news because I was always looking at the Livepeer Explorer and I was watching the minutes transcoded, and it was, yeah, as you said, it's not the It's definitely not true.
Like the Terra Luna collapse, you can see the amount of transcoding minutes halved, but that was nothing to do with the network. That was Terra Luna, right? You can see it for right there, like December, like November to December, like look at the price of ETH. Like the problem with the dashboard is it's based on an asset that fluctuates in price, and then there's been updates along the way which we've all decreased our price. So we've actually been doing more and more work to sustain the lower and lower fees paid. I'm doing this in quotes on the network. So I would say arguably we're at almost all-time high for network usage. So I just want to put that out there.
And that's actually an interesting point, right? Because that's for sure something, I mean, you need to be very deep in the woods to understand that. And coming back to what's interesting about, most of these DPIN networks is actually this combination of, you incentivize the supply side and it spins up the traction, because you provide reliable service, there is demand coming in and that demand grows. But then again, right, like a dashboard doesn't really reflect that. And then you wonder, okay, how much of like potential also like investment traction gets lost because people just don't know that the traction is actually there, because it seems like this is really some disconnect. Yeah. Is it like I don't know, but just
Livepeer, there is absolutely no way to calculate how much demand is on the network. There's no current way of doing that. Because if you wanted to do it in a trustless way, you would have to submit like a hash of each segment and post it to the blockchain saying, hey, I did this work, which would just be economically ridiculous. So all the work is done off chain. The only thing that's done on chain is payments, and payments are all, it's denominated in ETH. So ETH changes in price. And then on top of that, each orchestrator changes their price. So if and the big upgrade came, I don't know exactly what day it was, where they said, okay, VOD, we're going to accept VOD work, which is all video on demand. So anything you upload, right, like YouTube, it's going to get priced at a 30% discount because it doesn't need to be in real time as much, so we can have less costly infrastructure for it. And so since VOD came in, all of a sudden there's like a 30% price drop on lots of work, but yet in the dashboard that shows us a 30% drop in usage, which it's actually not, right?
Yeah, and I totally get that it's not feasible. It's just a very interesting point to on the kind of like the investment side of things.
Yeah, because I've been here long enough. I mean, Varies is really the OG in here. But like I've been here long enough to be like when I joined, there was really only like 10 orchestrators actually transcoding, like maybe even if that, like there was like 8, and so I spun up like a single GPU and it maxed out at 20 sessions like immediately, and now we're 2 years later and there's I think roughly half the network is a high performing orchestrator, so like the supply has actually grown like 5 to 6x since I've joined. So it's just, and they keep joining. I mean, Thomas Block is new, and there's another grant, the startup grant applicant that just won some stake 3 days ago. Right, we have the startup grant is a lot of these people have stayed around, and they're quite high performing. So. Yeah, it's just the minutes transcoded on the dashboard is like, in my opinion, one of the largest misconceptions about the network.
Messari doesn't think that way. It should be corrected, I guess.
I've asked many times for that to be either taken off or it should really be denominated in pixels. But the problem is no one can understand what that means to see it's billions of pixels transcoded or trillions of pixels transcoded. And even then, it still wouldn't be completely accurate. But, I mean, minutes is just so misleading. It's
and Papa Bear, you literally just bring up the most important part of this, which I totally forgot, is that's minutes transcoded, but at what rendition, what frame rate, what what did it come out as? Like, it's actually so. Now that you say that, it is actually so much more incorrect than I previously thought. Because like 4K.
Maybe if you say something about it, someone will listen. But I've tried many times to
like-
get that removed or changed. And
if you transcode a 4K video, that's worth not only, I think it's worth 6 times as much money as a 1080p, and so you have to pay out.
Yeah,
you have to-
they are doing an interview with Doug every 3 months, and I've never heard Doug correct them actually.
Yeah, it's you know, is that 2 million hours of 4K or is that 2 million hours of 720p, right? Because those are actually almost that's a magnitude difference of price, like a couple order of magnitude difference. So like that's even so much more confusing.
Yeah.
Minutes just doesn't make any sense. Like pixels make sense. Pixels make sense because you can calculate, 4K pixels, right? That's actually what we charge. So minutes make absolutely no sense. It doesn't.
I think it makes sense that Doug doesn't argue that point because it's so fine, like in the weeds of like what it actually means to distribute video over the internet that, for him just to wave his hand at the number is probably just good enough, right, for the conversation. But I think if you're looking at, if they're asking him specifically for those, those fine details, then I would be surprised if he didn't give it to him.
Yeah, pick your battles, right? Anyway, Rob, continue on with your questions if you have any more.
No, I mean, this is super fascinating, really good. I mean, I'm also every now in touch with Masari's researchers, so I maybe we can back channel that to see if they know about that. Because it's also new to me, right? Like it's one of those things that you really just like, okay, you look at the data that you can get, you follow Discord here and there, you try to dig in, but like then you understand, okay, there's like 10 more levels of depth to the rabbit hole you thought you're in. So that's super fascinating. Yeah, actually, I have to think about. For now, I think there was quite a lot to digest. For sure, my main takeaway is like that the little. I mean, not little. We knew that understanding setups and costs is like magnitude harder than just like the reward schemes. But it seems like Livepeer here is for sure then amongst our setup, one of the most complicated ones. So I have to see how we can come up with some survey, or what's the best way, because it almost feels like you maybe just want to reach out one by one, if people are willing, and then just make interviews over the phone basically, and not make like a standard survey and just like understand how people run it, to see how those setups differ and how that affects basically the general economical setup of the network.
I think it's a funnel, right? The survey is probably going to get a wider net of orchestrators versus phone calls, right? You're going to see a lot less probably respond to phone calls. Not saying that, that's a problem, right? People don't want to participate or they don't feel comfortable talking. Maybe they don't want to share their quote secret sauce. But I think in any event, like it's probably a multi-pronged approach, right? If, you can get a good survey or maybe you need some, finer details, and those interviews probably come in handy. I know there's quite a few of us that would have no problem sharing.
Yeah, that's for sure a good point. Yeah, the funnel is a good picture here to have. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd like to see the LPT inflation go down, and even if it's gonna come at the expense of some orchestrators, even if it's gonna come at the expense of some of them shutting down, then so be it, because it's a bear market.
I like I
If
said,
the orchestrators will do the same work, that would be okay.
I would highly recommend writing up a forum post about this opinion, because I think it would be a great topic for discussion. So
Yeah.
Are you a part of the forum post or the forum?
No, but I will sign up. Yeah.
Great. Sign up there. And yeah, under the governance like topic, I think that would be the perfect place to put it. And
Okay.
and then a next water cooler chat, if you do have that set up, come join us and discuss your proposal
Sure.
or at least address the problem that you see and your solution. And I'd be more than happy to definitely review it.
Yep, sure. Thank you.
Right.
Maybe one question on that now, just because you've been around for so long, has there been some, these tokenomics, agent-based simulations around dynamics of the inflation model, of the rewards, like these type of things that you typically see nowadays when people spin up networks?
Have we seen models been built around the current like 50% target? Is what you're saying?
Yeah. In general, the tokenomics model, so to speak, is of Livepeer, right? For example, I'm not sure if you follow Filecoin, but they have arrangements with block science and crypto econ labs and these guys, and then they would run simulations on all types of things. Obviously, that costs money, so I'm not suggesting to have that. I was just curious if there would have been anything like that in the past by whatever researcher would do that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's been any formal report on the inflation of Livepeer. I haven't really seen one. But I mean, the general consensus around Livepeer inflation is that it's not just an inflationary token that is handed out because we want to make more money. It's disincentivizing non-stakers. So the idea is there's only 100% piece of the pie, and if 50% or more are not delegating their stake, which means that they're not eligible to be slashed for delegating to untrustworthy delegators, then they just automatically get slashed for non-participant. So the idea is if you're delegating, that means you're participating in the security in the network, and therefore you should get rewarded ETH. But the idea is if you're not delegating, then you're going to be diluted out to the people who are participating. So the idea is really just around encouraging people to provide economic security to the network. And so that 50% was arbitrarily chosen at the beginning. We can definitely vote to change it, but the inflation is simply just to dilute the people who are not staking. So when you are staking, you're just gaining more piece of the pie for contributing your security because you're eligible to be slashed hypothetically.
Yeah, well, I mean, it encourages people to stake, which then in turn makes them less likely to, dump and sell, because it's a process to unstake and move your tokens from L2 to L1 to sell them. So I mean, it encourages people to hold the token too. So there's that additional incentive to get people to stake.
Yeah. I mean, work token model is for sure a really good approach from that regard. And as I said earlier, right, like that inflation for sure would be my main takeaway. Like, wouldn't be worried at all, even in the bear market.
Well, I think you have a lot of builders on this phone, and you have a lot of analysts that like to look at that kind of data. So I think just hearing the need is probably enough to maybe spawn something beautiful.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, what we'll do is we've been at this for an hour and 50 minutes. So, this was, I think, the longest Q&A session we've had. Rob, you've made it for the full 2 hours, which is quite impressive, actually. So congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back for being here with us.
Will do.
Degenerate.
Thanks,
Maybe
guys.
I'll just speak on myself, a degenerate who's here to build, the global infrastructure, decentralized video infrastructure for the world. And we're all here trying to achieve something similar. So, Rob, thank you for your article. For people that want to see it and look at it, head over to the forum. I think I've also linked it in the general channel where you can read not only just the Livepeer post he made regarding Livepeer specifically, but he has a longer post about all the different networks that he's done some research on. And, we didn't dive too, we have, there's enough content here to do this again, because I'd like to talk about other networks as well. So, but what we'll do is we'll end it here. Rob, do you have any last comments or questions that you want to leave us with?
No, yeah, thanks a lot for having it. This was super helpful. I enjoyed it a lot, and yeah, I'm looking forward to probably join this in the future as well at some point. Ideally with some more, insights.
Absolutely, and feel free to reach out to anyone in the community. We try and be helpful as possible. And what I'd like to do is maybe in a couple months, 6 months time or something, have you back on again with some updates or if you have any general questions. We do this every week, so please feel free to stop by and say hello to the community.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, any last comments or questions before we finish up today's water cooler chat? We only had one topic, which was my topic around DAO tooling. So if anyone has, I'll just post it in the Orchestrator chat. Just looking at DAO tooling for managing the video miner DAO. I have some ideas. I've checked out like 9 platforms already, so just looking for some feedback. And if anyone knows how to build Next React, I think it's Next.js apps, please let me know because I might need some help with forking some code. So with that being said, thank you all so much for being here. I do appreciate your time and effort to make Livepeer a successful, robust, and long-winded project where we can provide the world with great infrastructure. We will see you all next week. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.